Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This is the 8th one in the ecology series, but we're taking a little bit of a jump now because instead of looking at the natural world and how everything functions when it should be moving in harmony, we're now looking at the massive impact that we as humans have had on the planet as our population has massively increased. The first slide on this presentation is about exactly that, how our population has increased. Then we're going to look at some of the impacts of that huge number of humans that have appeared on the planet. This is still part of the GCSE course, and please do subscribe to my channel on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Thanks. Okay, so let's start with that increase then. Now, we know, or at least fairly confident, that humans, which are Homo sapiens, seem to have evolved in North Africa about 300,000 years ago. Now, there's a little bit of debate over where, because it was thought, and up until fairly recently, that southwest Egypt, so that's kind of northeast of Africa, that there were remains that were discovered there that dated back to about 200,000 years ago, and those were very clearly Homo sapien remains. However, fairly recently, some more remains were discovered in Morocco, so that's northwest Africa, so over the other side of northern Africa, and they date back to about 300,000. Now, there's some give and take in how those dates were made. So we don't really know which side of North Africa they started from, and of course they could have migrated back and forth. It's very unlikely that they're involved in both places at the same time. That doesn't really happen in evolution. But what we do know is it was roughly 300,000 years ago that we first appeared on the planet. Now, here's a couple of artistic renditions of what those early Homo sapiens would have looked like. Those are based on remains that we found in extrapolations, and they are very distinctly human. You put them in sort of modern clothes, you put them in modern settings, they're going to blend in into the background. This guy might need a bit of a haircut to fit in, but otherwise they're modern humans. If you took a child from that era, if there was a baby that you could take from 300,000 years ago, transport it to the present day and raise it, then there's no reason to suspect that as an adult it wouldn't be exactly the same as any of us with the same ability for intellect. So these were true Homo sapiens, and this is 300,000 years ago. Now put that on the overall timescale that the Earth is about 4.2 billion years old. That's, and a billion, remember, is 1,000 thousands. So really on that scale, we're talking about Homo sapiens evolved that long ago in the grand scheme of things. But nonetheless, we can still extrapolate populations from there. We know from kind of the evidence that we can guess at what the populations would be. So let's look at the data above my head. And this is all from ourworldindata.org. It's a really good website for getting all kinds of data, but it's very reliable, scientifically gained evidence. So if we jump to about 10,000 years ago, 10,000 BCE, before Common Era, so we're actually talking about 12,000 years ago. That was the very end of the Paleolithic era. Okay, Paleolithic era is kind of the Stone Age. People were using stone tools. It was a very basic time. It was also the end of the last ice age. So there was lots of megafauna around on the planet, things like mammoths. So we know that our ancestors at that time hunted mammoths, lived quite primitive lives, were nomadic, so would move around from place to place, hunting the food, and would go where the food was. Now, it's estimated from what we know of the migration patterns of humans moving around that the global population of humans then was about 4 million. Now, 4 million really isn't many. Okay, when you think of it, it's sort of a large English city might have 1 million people living there. Okay, so 4 million, not a great number, but the entire planet. But then if we move forward from 10,000 BC, we enter the Mesolithic period. Now, the Mesolithic period was really, really important in terms of human evolution, because it was Mesolithic when humans first made the realization that we could control our environment rather than just letting our environment control us. There's not really any other species that do that. But it was in the Mesolithic that humans realized, well, actually, rather than trying to hunt and find food and forage, we can grow it in one location. So the Mesolithic, so after 10,000 BCE, was the invention of agriculture. We also know that the Mesolithic is when humans start to develop art, lots of the cave paintings and things like that you can find around the planet date to sometime after 10,000 BCE, so in the Mesolithic period. So it was a really important time of development. It was kind of the start of civilization. But nonetheless, population didn't massively change. So what we're going to do, we're going to jump forward a bit now from that. And I'm going to pull up a graph and data above my head here for what happened right the way up to about the 1700s, so about 1700. So pretty recently, we're talking 300 years ago. Now, if you look at the data above my head, you can see that at about year 0, so 0 of the Common Era, which in the Christian calendar is when Jesus was born, there was about 190 million people on the planet. So we've gone from 4 million to 190 million in those 10,000 years. So not a massive increase. If you look at the graph, sorry, we don't have that early data on there, but from 0 to 1700, you can still see that it's fairly flat. We're still tracking the bottom of the graph. In 1700, so we're still talking 300 years ago, it was estimated that there was about 600 million people on the planet. It's what's happened since then that's been a bit more terrifying. If I reveal the rest of the data in the graph now, look at what happens. Massive, massive increase in a very short amount of time. Because once you get through the 1700s and you enter the 1800s and you enter the Victorian era, the Industrial Revolution, humans started to improve medicine and healthcare and hygiene. The germ theory was realized, so they realized that disease could be spread by germs, which meant we as humans could try and control that. We basically, in that Victorian era, discovered loads of ways to minimize death. So we learnt ways to keep ourselves alive. That contributed significantly to the human population. And because there were also massive developments in agriculture and mechanization and use of tractors and combine harvesters and things like that, we could produce huge amounts of food for this growing population. So it's terrifying that only if you look at the data above my head, literally in the last 200 years, we've gone from less than 1 billion up to the current 7.8 billion. And actually look at the data and look at the steepness of the graph. You can see that we were 4 billion in 1975. That's only 45 years ago. That's no time at all. There was half the number of humans on the planet than there currently is. That's terrifying, okay? But obviously that huge and very rapid increase of one species on the planet is going to have a really, really significant impact. So the dramatic increase in one species will obviously have an impact on the planet, and especially if that species is technologically advanced. Okay, we have machines for agriculture, we have machines for industry, we have machines for literally changing the planet around us and impacting on all the creatures on it. So we're making a lot of changes. Let's have a look at that next. So the most obvious questions that come up now we know that population has increased so much is, where do we put that many people? And also, how do we create land for growing the food necessary to feed them all? I said that since the Mesolithic period, 8,000-9,000 years ago, we started farming and invented agriculture. Well, how have we maximized that to get enough food to feed this population? Of course, you need fields to grow that food in. So basically, we had to create that land from what was already there. So this little bit is on deforestation and habitat destruction. Now, over the last few hundred years, we've decimated huge amounts of the natural forests and rainforests that are on this planet. It's been calculated that about 1.5 acres, that's about the size of a rugby field, is cut down every single second. That means there's a rugby field gone, there's a rugby field gone, there's a rugby field gone, just wiped out. That rainforest is no more, and it will look like those pictures over there. That's every single second. That's terrifying. If we continue at that rate, we will have worked through all of the world's forests and rainforests within 100 years. Now, 100 years may seem like a long time, but that's your children and your grandchildren's generation. At this rate, there will not be the forests. Now, of course, that's a terrifying, terrifying thing, not least because of the habitat destruction. There's a huge amount of organisms that live in these forests. It's estimated, or calculated pretty accurately actually, the rainforests and forests cover about 6 to 7% of the planet. So 6 to 7% of the planet But 50% of all species on the planet live in that 6 to 7%. 50%. And once they're gone, that's it. Those species that live there won't be able to come back. Huge numbers of species have gone extinct already. Even quite significant species have gone extinct. Things, like the black rhino recently disappeared. The Tasmanian tiger, or Tasmanian wolf as it's sometimes called, gone. The dodo that lived on an island, living its life, perfectly evolved to what was there. We wiped the dodo out when we started sailing around the world. Sailors stopped on those islands, thought, oh, there's a big bird, we can eat that. And we literally ate dodos into extinction within a very small window of time. So we've destroyed habitats for these things. Now, one of the really, really key things that we've destroyed, something I think is really significant, are these guys. Orangutans, so closely related to us. You only need to look into the eyes of that male orangutan there. Look at the expression on the baby orangutan's face up above me. They're so human. Orangutans now are on the critically endangered list. There is a very good chance orangutans will be gone completely extinct in the wild within the next 10 years or so. That's terrifying. And that's because to make space for our agriculture, and especially for products that we require in other things like beauty products, shampoo, food, things like that. Palm oil is a major contributor to this. Rainforests, the orangutan's home, has been cut down to plant palm trees to get the palm oil that we use for food. Now, this is just humans taking over land so that we can get things we want, not even necessarily things that we need. Okay, it's want rather than need. Okay, so these guys could go extinct very, very soon. Now, forests also do a great deal of the planet's photosynthesis, providing us with the very oxygen that we breathe. So it seems crazy that these things that we rely on to breathe, we are destroying. When those forests are gone, there will be far less photosynthesis going on, far less oxygen to be produced into the atmosphere for us, and also, of course, less carbon dioxide being pulled out of the atmosphere, which is a contributor to global warming. Now let's jump quickly onto pollution now. So obviously this huge increase in people, we're obviously creating a lot of wastes, not least just our own bodily wastes as sewage. Huge amounts of humans crammed into very small areas like cities, making a lot of poo and a lot of urine and a lot of wastes that are just going back into the environment. Now, you could say, well, that's fine, they'll break down, they'll biodegrade. Hopefully you've seen the decay lesson, but a lot of it is being pumped into ecosystems that can't cope with that level of waste. For example, this waste pipe above my head, that's just raw sewage coming straight out, going straight out into the sea. Now, we put up warning notices. You can see up there, sewage outlet, that sign for no swimming. We warn humans, oh, don't swim here, it's horrible, it's full of wastes. We don't warn the wildlife. The wildlife doesn't get a choice. It just gets all our wastes dumped into it. That has a big impact on the environment around those areas. Also, chemicals from industrial processes. We've got loads and loads of factories making things to supply the goods that we have come to depend on as societies. But those things have to be made in factories where chemicals are used. There will be chemical waste. Some of those chemicals will escape into the environment. That's where they can poison animals, poison water systems, poison the ground where the trees and plants grow. Also, there's something called bioaccumulation, which means poisons can concentrate as they move their way up the food webs. Think about the feeding relationships presentations you saw in the pyramids of number. It might be that there's 1,000 grass plants. Now, some poisons have gone onto those. Each grass plant will only get 1/1000th of the poison. But if a rabbit or 2 rabbits come along and eat that grass, each rabbit might eat 500 grass plants. So each of the rabbits has now got 500,000ths of the poison concentrating, half the original poison that went out. If one fox eats those 2 rabbits, that fox is getting the full dose of all that poison going into it. So the poisons kind of concentrate as they move up the trophic levels and can kill some of the top levels. Without the top levels, remember from interdependence, the other ones can increase and cause massive damage to then the producer level. So it's a really significant thing, poisons that get released into the environment. Poisonous gases given off from combustion in industry that all of the organisms breathe. They can also cause acid rain, which we're going to look at in the next slide because you do know that, need to know that in a little bit more detail. But excess use of chemical fertilizers in farming Okay, this may not sound too bad. Fertilizers are a great thing. They're something brilliant that was invented by us. We can get these chemical fertilizers to put the minerals into the ground to help feed the next generation of crops. It produces more food to feed all these people. Brilliant. It means we can feed the population that's on the planet. However, if they're excessively used and they wash off the land into water systems, they can create blooms of algae in water systems. Now, you've probably seen this. This is where the surface of ponds go totally green. They almost look like you can step on them. If the surface of the pond is totally covered in green, no sunlight can get to any underwater plants. That means there's no underwater photosynthesis to oxygenate the water. That means any animal life in the water is going to die, sink down to the bottom. Decomposition and bacteria will then break those down, do more respiration to remove more oxygen, and the water beneath that green surface layer is effectively totally dead. You've killed that ecosystem. So fertilizers can be very damaging. And of course, these are just a few examples. There's loads of other really obvious ones, like these, oil tankers that spill their oil into the water. That, this pelican totally glued up with oil here has massive impacts on the wildlife around those areas. So pollution, just the wastes that we as humans produce as this vast population in the way that we've become used to living in our civilizations, we put a lot of rubbish out there into the environment. We just mentioned acid rain. We're going to run through that quickly because you do need to know some of the facts on this. It also links up to the chemistry syllabus. So if you're studying chemistry, you will need to know this. So acid rain, let's put some horrible acid raindrops coming down on me. And acid rain is formed when chemicals released from the combustion process react with water vapor in the air to form acids. So if you're burning lots of fuels, all that smoke, all those pollutants go up into the atmosphere. If there's water vapor in the air, so rain or formation of rain, those chemicals can react together. Let's look at the three main examples of these. So the first one is the most common. This is when carbon dioxide given off. So you'll see the CO2 I've put in red over there. Carbon dioxide reacts with water. It forms carbonic acid, H2CO3. Carbonic acid is a relatively weak acid, but if it falls in big enough quantities, falls in rivers, falls in lakes, falls on the land, it's going to affect the animals and plants that grow there. The second one's a bit more serious. This is when sulfur dioxide, SO2 that I've put in yellow, reacts with water. That can form sulfuric acid, which is a much worse acid. That can do some direct damage. And thirdly, if you've got nitrogen dioxide, if that reacts with water vapor, again, you see the equation there, you have to balance it out a bit because of what forms, but you get nitric acids that form. Okay, nitric acids can be really nasty as well. So between those three acids, there's some major damage that can be done to environments. For example, you've got this hillside here that was covered in trees. Because so much acid rain fell on this hillside, and that acid was being taken up by the plants when they're absorbing through their roots, it killed all of the trees in that area. That means all of the organisms that depend on those trees as the producers for their food chains, or just the places that they live within that habitat, that entire ecosystem gets wiped out because the trees die. They have massive knock-on effects throughout the whole food chain. If it falls in water systems, here you can see this big lake. All of those fish are dead because the water has effectively become poisoned by the acids. But it's not just natural systems that can be affected. This stone statue of a lion, you can see how it's been worn almost smooth because the acids eat away at the limestone that they're made of and literally dissolve the rock. Now that can dissolve things like statues that we've made, but it can also do it naturally in the environment and can create some quite beautiful things like this cavern here. Okay, the limestone that would have been in there would have been dissolved, would have been totally disappeared by the acids, and then as the acid drips through the rest and carries minerals down with it, it would have formed those stalactites that are falling down. Drips from the stalactites would have landed beneath to form the stalagmites growing up. So, acid rain can have some quite beautiful effects, but you look at the ecological, environmental effects of acid rain, and when you consider it's largely being worsened by us and our industrial processes, it becomes a very serious thing. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on this subject because it's something that's been so big in the news over the last couple of years. And there seems to finally be a massive movement of humans to try and get rid of this. But plastic and other non-biodegradable wastes. This was the cover from the National Geographic magazine that really brought this to people's forefront, along with David Attenborough, who's an absolute hero of mine, who really publicised how bad plastics can be. If you think of the Blue Planet series, Blue Planet 2, that focused a lot on this, and this iconic image looking like an iceberg, but it's actually a plastic carrier bag floating upside down in the oceans. And it's saying that our understanding of the problem is just the tip of the iceberg, because it's gotten so bad, the level of wastes and rubbish that we are just covering our planet with, and those in turn are destroying life and environments. I'm going to put some pictures up now. I'll warn you, some of these pictures aren't very nice. They can be quite distressing, but I'm not going to offer any apologies for that, because this is what is happening and this is what we need to understand as humans so we can try and do something about it. But you can see the level of pollution that's here. This is plastic bottles and waste that have washed up on the shore. This is a picture out to sea, way out to sea, of the amount of plastic floating around. This is a river in India, totally choked with wastes. A seal caught up in a plastic fishing net. That seal's survival chances are now massively decreased. A dead penguin caught up in a plastic drinks holder. A dolphin playing with one, but it could choke on that very easily. A dead seabird that started to decay, revealing the amount of plastic inside it. Not just marine animals either. Look at this hedgehog that's trapped in some plastic. It's going to affect its chances of survival. And then next to me, these two. These are the ones that I'm really worried about. These are microplastics and macroplastics, the tiny broken down parts that won't biodegrade, but that still just enter the ecosystem. And on this fingertip next to me, those are microplastics, tiny, tiny little pieces. But it's estimated that those microplastics have polluted every single part of this planet, down to the very deepest parts of the ocean. We're catching fish from way deep down in the ocean, and when you examine them, you find these microplastics inside their digestive tracts and embedded in their very flesh. This is a major problem. Thankfully, single-use plastic use is greatly decreasing, because awareness of how bad it can be is increasing. And this is where education is really the most powerful tool we've got in trying to save the wonderful planet that we live on. So I'm not doing my usual summary page at the end of this presentation, because really the only thing that needs to be said as a summary in this is there are a huge number of humans on the planet and we're doing a lot of damage. But it's not too late. We can make changes, we can start to reverse these problems, but we all need to be a part of this solution. And that's why education, videos like this, should really hopefully help to bring it home to people and help them to change their ways. From here, I'd like you to go to the Ecology 9 presentation, which is on global warming. This is the second on the human impact videos. There are only two that I've done on human impact. And this one's really, really important, because climate change and global warming is a massive issue that affects every living thing on this planet. So head there now, please. If you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to my channel, like this video if you've enjoyed it. And please do remember I've got a Facebook page now. So go there, there's lots of extra information and curious facts about biology. Head there, have a look. Thanks for your time.